Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri, and we're going to be having an interesting conversation. In a bit, we'll be joined by International Coordinator for Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, Charlotte Cades. She's coming to us live from Beirut in Lebanon, and we're going to talk about, I think, something that us here in South Africa know all well, especially given the past in, the apartheid era where you had prisoners, literally, men, women, teenagers, young children who would lose their lives in prisons, that were ran by the apartheid government. And there was literally no explanation. There were measly excuses given. There were excuses about, people jumping off buildings. There were excuses about people going on hunger strikes. We know the issue of Steve Biko, one of, Africa's leading voices when it comes to Black consciousness, people's self-determination, and how he lost his life. And we're seeing similar occurrences out in Palestine, where a 17-year-old Palestinian teenager, Walid Ahmad, became the first teenager to lose his life in an Israeli prison, exposing the brutal reality of occupation and the deeper horrific occurrences in Israeli prisons, and what the prisons they have been going through for a very, very long time. And to unpack all of this, we'll be joined by International Coordinator for Samidoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, Charlotte Cades. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time, and always a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to join you here at Salam Media.
I think we can kickstart the conversation with maybe from your end, from your side. What information have you gathered? What do you know about the death of Walid Ahmad, who was only 17 years of age?
Absolutely. Well, Walid Khalid al-Basha Ahmed was 17 years old. He was from the town of Silwad, which is east of Ramallah, and he was kidnapped from his home by Zionist occupation forces who invaded his family's home, broke down the door at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 30th of September. And there he was beaten, thrown in the back of a military jeep. He was taken to an infamous interrogation center called the Huara Interrogation Center, which is established in a military base, which has been set up in an occupied village outside Nablus. And there he was mistreated, tortured, beaten, subjected to starvation, subjected to all forms of psychological, physical, and medical mistreatment and abuse. And then after that, he was taken to the Megiddo prison, which is known as actually the harshest Zionist prison, particularly for minors to be imprisoned in. And of course, adults and minors are imprisoned together, and they are subjected to the same forms of horrific abuse and mistreatment. And what we are seeing across the board inside Zionist prisons right now, it's really indescribable and deeply inhumane. I mean, if you've seen the pictures of the liberated men who were freed by the resistance in the Tufan al-Ahrar exchange, you will see how many of them were extremely skinny, had their clothes just hanging off their frame because they'd been subjected to extreme starvation or were suffering from skin diseases. Inside Megiddo prison, scabies is running rampant, and the Zionist administration is actually encouraging this. Prisoners are denied access to water, to cleaning supplies, to health supplies, to access to medication, and they're being deliberately served rotten food in small portions. For example, you have cells that are meant to hold 6 men or boys, and they're holding 16 people inside these cells instead. And that day, they were, instead of refrigerating food or having the food stored somewhere, this was during Ramadan, they would leave cheese and dairy out all day. And a lot of the times it was rotten even before Palestinians were given this food. And this is part and parcel of the policy that's been announced by, for a very long time. The notorious racist Itamar Ben-Gvir was the director of the Israel Prison Service as the Minister of National Security. So this is the announced policy of the Zionist regime to make life difficult or impossible for Palestinian prisoners. He's the 63rd martyr inside the Zionist prisons since the 7th of October 2023, but he's the first, of course, who is a child, who is a minor. And what this really shows is that, like, and he was a healthy young man. He was a healthy teen. He loved to play football. And what's happened is that the situation inside the Zionist prisons is so extreme. The starvation is so extreme. The medical mistreatment is so extreme that someone who is a 17-year-old boy who loved playing football, who was physically strong, can be killed by what is fundamentally a policy of slow assassination and killing through starvation, torture, and systematic denial of medical needs. That when he collapsed on the ground, the other boys in his area were calling and demanding help, and instead he was left to lay there and die.
Oh, really, really horrific picture that you're painting there, Charlotte. But as you're busy narrating this, I'm asking myself, have the conditions always been this bad in Israeli prisons, or there's been an almost escalation since October the 7th?
Well, I want to say that it's both in some ways, right? Because the Zionist regime has been holding Palestinian prisoners since al-Nakba. And in fact, when Palestinian prisoners were kidnapped by the Zionist regime during al-Nakba, they were sent into forced labor camps where they were essentially forced to build the infrastructure of the Zionist state, like by physical force, killing, and abuse, essentially forced to build part of the infrastructure of the Zionist state that was dispossessing them from their own lands. And of course, this was built on top of the British prison system. When the British were colonizing Palestine, they were imprisoning Palestinians for seeking their independence from British colonialism and seeking to stop the ongoing Zionist threat of colonial occupation of Palestine. And of course, the stories of the torture that Palestinians would undergo during interrogation has been something that has been extremely visible for decades upon decades. Palestinian women detainees have been routinely and as a matter of practice, as a systematic practice, subjected to sexual assault and mistreatment. Palestinian male prisoners have been subjected to severe beating, electrical shocks, having their fingernails pulled out. Basically, every kind of torture you can imagine has been in the history of the Palestinian prisoners movement. And this has been, one of the things that has mobilized hunger strikes, mass actions throughout the decades of Zionist colonialism. But what we're seeing now is kind of an industrial scale version of this kind of torture and abuse and mistreatment inside the prisons. Much like what we're seeing in Gaza is this industrial scale genocide, when Zionism has always been a genocidal project in Palestine, but it's been escalated and exacerbated to a point where they're attempting to essentially, if possible, cause the death, incapacity, or disability of every Palestinian prisoner that they have inside the occupation jails. And they're using this as a mechanism because they want to stop the resistance. And they want to stop the resistance in all of its forms. I mean, you have Palestinian prisoners who are jailed for being part of the student movement, for being part of an organization on their campus, for just defending their land against settlers that are trying to steal it, for allegedly the most common charge for children is throwing rocks towards settlers or soldiers. You have these very basic charges that actually comprise the vast majority of the Palestinian prisoner population. The leaders of the student movement, the women's movement, the labor movement, of community organizations are locked up in Zionist jails to try to make it more and more difficult. And I should say here that when I talk about this number of 63, the majority of which are Palestinians from Gaza, that doesn't actually convey the full number of martyrs who have been killed within the Zionist prison system and under their control, particularly since the 7th of October 2023, because Palestinians who have been kidnapped en masse from Gaza have been subjected to some of the most extreme, inhumane forms of torture and abuse, of physical mistreatment, of sexual abuse against women and men, of psychological abuse of being forced essentially to stand 24 hours a day, to be naked 24 hours a day, to be beaten and abused and sexually assaulted, to be subjected to kind of extremely loud music, completely deprived of sleep. This has been the daily experience for Palestinians held in the notorious torture camps like Sdereit Taman. And this has been like a particularly extreme form of the prison experience directed toward Palestinians abducted from Gaza. And this is part and parcel of the same genocidal approach that we see involved in the bombing of schools and the throwing of massive missiles on children playing in the streets.
Mm-hmm. I want us to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to draw two parallels between what's currently happening in Palestine and what was happening in South Africa during the apartheid era. The apartheid government, I think it was back in 1967, they introduced laws like the General Law Amendment Act, and I think there's something, as I'm busy reading and doing my research on Palestine and the prison system there, there's something called the administrative detention that is being used there. Yes. That word keeps popping out. So we'll touch on those two after this short break.
Day by day, this is Salam Media.
It's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet many children go to school hungry because of poverty. Penny Appeal South Africa's Breakfast Club aims to get a warm, hearty meal to underprivileged children so they can spend their day prospering in their schoolwork. Help feed a needy learner for only 5 Rand a day, or 150 Rand a month. Or visit our website www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573 to find out how you can donate. Penny Appeal South Africa. Small change, big difference.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Abu Huraira narrated that he heard the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, say, "In black seed there is a healing for every disease except death." This Ramadan, experience the health benefits of this ancient blessed seed by using the Tib Black Seed range. Black seed assists the body to boost immunity, regulate blood sugar levels, reduce inflammation, and act as a potent antioxidant. Experience a holistic approach to health by introducing the Tib Black Seed range into your Ramadan routine. Available in capsules, pure cold-pressed oil, and a vapor rub. Trust Tib Health Sciences for quality black seed products. For more information, visit blackseed.co.za. Available at leading pharmacies.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, buckies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Send food and send kindness to those who have lost their homes and have been plunged into poverty. For those who are a meal away from starvation, a food parcel means an entire family can eat this Ramadan. That's the power of food. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
You South African, of course. You anxious about the future. We've got you covered. Build on your wealth portfolio with Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange. Visit us at 151 Stephen Dlamini Road, Musgrave, Durban, or call us on 031-202-4700 for more information. Randry Jewelers Gold Coin Exchange, your passport to gold investment.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salailo Makwidiri. The time is 26 minutes past 8, and we're still focused on a deeply, deeply disturbing case that I think highlights the ongoing human rights violations faced by Palestinian detainees in Israeli prisons. We're talking about, I think, a very disturbing, headline that came out just a few days ago. Walid Ahmad, a 17-year-old Palestinian who has become the first minor to die in Israeli detention, arrested 6 months ago in the occupied West Bank without charge. And I think that's very, very important to highlight, without charge, because Charlotte, thank you so much for staying with us. Before I went to that break, I wanted to make some parallels between apartheid South Africa and what's currently happening in Gaza, because we sometimes say it so much that we see ourselves in Gaza as South Africans, and they see themselves in us so much that it kind of loses context. But back in 1967, the apartheid government introduced laws like the Public Safety Act of 1953, which was introduced in response to growing militancy, according to them, growing militancy, and contained the option for detention without trial. They also introduced the General Laws Amendment Act, initially allowed for 12 days detention without trial, and the 12 days was later extended to about 90 days, and then extended again to 180 days. And then there was also the Terrorism Act, which allowed for indefinite detention for interrogation without any kind of trial. So as I'm mentioning those, are there parallels that we can take out of the Israeli prison system that we are seeing being administered today? I mentioned before we went to the break that the administrative detention, that word, that phrase keeps popping out when I do my reading and I research about what's happening in Israeli prisons. If you can just unpack that for us, administrative detention, what is it? Are there parallels to South Africa, and why is it being used by this Israeli apartheid genocidal machine?
Absolutely. There are definitely parallels. And thank you for bringing up all of these specific points. Of course, as you mentioned, in the case of Walid, he was imprisoned with these kind of ongoing, indefinite extensions, what they were calling pre-trial detention, but there's not necessarily a trial being scheduled at any point. This becomes extremely normal when they say they're going to charge you in the military court, but they just extend and extend and extend the detention over and over and over again. And that is apparently the military court process, which is supposed to reflect more of a rule of law, but it doesn't, more than the administrative detention process. Now, it's important to note here, there are almost 4,000 Palestinians right now of the nearly 10,000 inside Zionist jails who are held right now under administrative detention with no charge, no trial. Administrative detention was first introduced to Palestine by the British colonial mandate, and then it was adopted by the Zionist project as part of like an ongoing system to control the indigenous Palestinian people and subject them to arbitrary detention at any time. Essentially, any Palestinian can be grabbed off of the street, or kidnapped from their home by these occupation forces. And this has also included Palestinian citizens of the Zionist regime in Palestine 48 who hold Israeli citizenship, Palestinians from Jerusalem, Palestinians from the West Bank, Palestinians from Gaza are now being held in a version of this that they're calling being an unlawful combatant, which they're applying, by the way, to doctors, nurses, and health workers providing health services to Palestinians in Gaza, like Dr. Hassam Abu Safia. But essentially, you can be just ordered to administrative detention, which is 1 to 6 months being held behind bars in these horrific conditions with no charge, no trial. Even your lawyer is not able to see what they're charging you with, what they're accusing you of, what the evidence is against you. And this is indefinitely renewable. So there are many Palestinians right now who are jailed inside Zionist prisons, who are being subjected to beatings, who are being subjected to torture, who are being starved through a deliberate policy of starvation. There are people being held in administrative detention who have cancer and are not receiving proper treatment. There are people being held in administrative detention who have chronic illnesses and are being denied the medications that they need to manage those illnesses. And this kind of detention is indefinitely renewable. Hundreds of Palestinians have spent years at a time being held under repeatedly renewed administrative detention orders. And I mean, ostensibly, you can appeal these orders, but there's only one answer to all of these appeals, and that is appeal denied.
Wow. Yeah. I think that's something that everyone, I think, around the world knows at this point. But I'm going to ask you a question that sometimes feels a bit futile to ask, but I think it's important to ask because the conversation needs to continue. When it comes to pressure, is there meaningful pressure that can be put, from the UN, from the Red Cross, or from international human rights bodies to hold Israel accountable for, their continued, human rights violations? What can be done at this point? And I'm saying, it might sound futile to us because they've already gotten away with so much and nothing has been done. And, the prison system has been this way, as you mentioned, since the first Nakba, and it only has gotten worse. Is there anything that can be done? Is there any kind of, action that can, be enforced to make sure that they're at least held accountable for this?
Well, it's an important question to bring up because the fact is that the United Nations and international humanitarian organizations are not living up to their responsibilities. Of course, there are, great advocates like the UN Special Rapporteur on Palestine, Francesca Albanese, who is, working tirelessly to try to bring an end to this genocide. There are very important efforts like what we're seeing South Africa pursuing in the International Court of Justice to hold the Zionist regime accountable. And of course, we have, the actions of Yemen in working to defend Palestine on a military level and to essentially blockade the traffic of genocide and stop this ongoing support to genocide that's being funded by the flow of trade around the world. The actions of the resistance in South Lebanon, in Iraq, the support of Iran for Palestine. These are all, material and important forms of support. We have to demand more from the United Nations, from international humanitarian organizations, certainly, but we also have to build our popular movement. We have to really do everything that we can to get our countries to completely cut relations with the Zionist regime. We should be talking about expelling the Zionist regime from the United Nations, not merely condemning it or criticizing it in a series of resolutions that will be vetoed by the United States with its position in the UN Security Council, which it has used to justify and enable genocide, not just for the past 18 months, but for the past 77 years. So, we need to escalate the boycott, the protest, the direct actions to shut down the mechanisms of genocide and to do everything that we can also to support those countries that are taking action, including through the courts and through the legal process, to try to make this international justice system that's supposed to provide justice for people that are being subjected to crimes against humanity to actually achieve and obtain some form of justice without delays, without repeated delays, without pressure from the United States, the Zionist regime, and other Western imperialist powers, which is the situation that we're seeing at the present time. But there's no way that there's going to be judicial action without popular movement and that has a material effect on the Zionist regime. So keeping up things like boycotts are not futile and they are not useless, because the fact is that one of the reasons why Yemen is being bombed by the United States right now is because its actions have caused billions of dollars in losses to the Zionist shipping industry. And when the Zionist machinery of war needs to suffer those kinds of economic losses as well in order to put meaningful, substantive pressure to bring an end to this ongoing genocide, because it becomes no longer feasible or sustainable, because we certainly aren't going to end this genocide by appealing to their consciences.
No, definitely. And just lastly, before I let you go, Charlotte, you are currently in Beirut. We saw just a week ago Israel conducting the first strike on the city since that ceasefire agreement. And we also saw yesterday Israeli airstrikes on Beirut, which have killed 4 people. What's the latest that you can tell us on that front?
Well, one of the things that what we see it in Gaza, we see it in Lebanon, we see it in Syria, we see it throughout the region, is that what we're looking at is a Zionist project that is constantly expansionist, that is fundamentally and deeply an enemy to all of its neighbors, and that is essentially trying to destroy them, undermine their sovereignty, eliminate their ability to defend themselves in order to steal more land. And we're seeing that happening in Syria right now. There's the assassination policy that the Zionists pursue when they attack a residential building or a village, and they say that they were attacking a member of the resistance. On the one hand, it's often just a pretext and they just want to continue the bombing campaign. But on the other hand, they do want to eliminate the resistance. They want to eliminate the resistance so that they will have an easy path forward to come and steal land and to come and essentially dominate the future of the region. And they're being supported in that by the United States. And given basically complete carte blanche to commit war crimes across the region. So this is a dangerous moment, essentially, for anyone in this region and around the world that actually believe in self-determination, sovereignty, the independence of peoples, and want to see a world in which people live with justice and equality, and not with the domination of an illegitimate settler colonial regime that's been implanted in the region to serve U.S. imperialist interests.
I think we're going to leave on that note. Charlotte, thank you so much for chatting to us. Always a pleasure getting your insights, and really, really appreciate it again.
Thank you so much again. It's an honor always to join you.
There you go. That was Charlotte Cates coming to us live from Beirut, and I think unpacking a very, very horrific 10 of events. The death of 17-year-old Palestinian teenager Walid Ahmad, who died in an Israeli prison under, well, questionable circumstances. Something that we all know well here in South Africa, and historically in Israel, has happened so many times, but this time is a bit more concerning, because you have the first teenager to die, 17 years of age, a baby literally having to die in very difficult circumstances in a prison cell, and there's no explanation. There's no one that's being held accountable, and the world can't continue like this. We can't just move on as if nothing happened. This can't be just another number. Action needs to be taken, as you heard from Charlotte there. You can also do something. Boycotts are not futile. They actually have an impact. That's the least that you can do. You can go to your government headquarters, you can protest there and put pressure to have your government do something, like we've seen with South Africans going to Pretoria in the union buildings and saying to the president, you need to move, you need to do something, because the people of Palestine are dying and the world is watching. So it's disturbing, I know, and sometimes it takes the steam out of you, but we need to keep the fight going. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be with you after this.
rejuvenating media day by day. This